everyone, and welcome back to another episode of All Things Science with Miss Muhammad. Now today and for the next couple of weeks we are going to be doing experiments involving eggs, and I love a good pun, so we're going to be doing experiments. Alright, so for today's experiment we are going to be doing something called the floating egg experiment. So let's jump right into this experiment and the materials that you will need. Alright, so first you are going to need 5 cups. They can either be plastic or glass. Alright, so next you are going to need some water. You are going to need a measuring cup. You are going to need some salt. You are going to need a spoon. And lastly, you are going to need an egg, and you're going to want to make sure that the egg is at room temperature. So what I'm going to do is in the cups number 2 through 5, I am going to put a 1/3 cup of water inside of each one of them. Alright, so now in my bowl I have 1.5 cups of water. And in this bowl, this is where we are going to make our salt concentration. So we are going to be making some salt water. So to make our salt water, I'm going to start by pouring in 1/2 cup of salt with 1.5 cups of water. This is a lot of salt. Alright, and then I'm just going to start stirring it in. Now our goal is to dissolve as much of the salt as possible before we add more water. Alright, so now that I feel like I've dissolved the salt as best as it can with the amount of water inside, I'm going to go ahead and add in that 1 cup of water that I reserved. Alright, and now I'm going to continue stirring until the salt is completely dissolved. This may take a couple minutes, so just be patient. Alright, so I have finished dissolving all of the salt into our 2.5 cups of water. And now we are going to put in 3/4 cup of water, of our salt water, into cup number 1. So with our experiment, we are going to see what happens to an egg when it is inside of different types of water. And the water that we are making will have different concentrations. Now you may wonder, what do you mean, concentration? So in school when we say, oh, you need to have concentration, that means you need to be focused. But we're talking about a different type of concentration here. So concentration in science, or the concentration of a liquid, can tell us how much of another type of substance, so in our case salt, was added into our liquid water. It's not always water and it won't always be salt, but that's what we're using for today. Understanding the concentration of the different waters that we are going to make is going to be very important for this experiment. Now I said earlier that we were going to be trying to make an egg float. We have to understand what causes different items to sink or float. The ability of an object to float in water or another liquid is called buoyancy. So when we see things that float, that means that they're very buoyant. They're made in a way that makes it easy for them to sit on top of a liquid. Now you might be wondering, well, how does an object become buoyant? Well, that is based on a couple different factors, but one of them is based on density. Now, all of the things around us are made up of things called mass or matter. That says how much particles or molecules are taking up a specific amount of space or volume. So different things will have a different density. So for example, a bag filled with rocks is going to be a lot more dense than an empty bag, just because there's more things filling up the same amount of space. Alright, so for our egg and anything that sinks, if it sinks, it means that it is more dense than our water. There are more particles in the object taking up space than there are in the water that's taking up the same amount of space. So it's going to sink to the bottom. Now if something floats, it means that it is less dense than the water. So the water has more molecules taking up space than the object does. Alright, so that's what causes things to sink or float. It's density. Now, salt, when we add it into water, it changes the density of water. It allows things to float sometimes a little bit more easily. So, to get into our experiment and what we're going to do, we are going to make some different concentrations of water. So, cup number 1 is just going to be completely salt water, whereas cup number 5 is going to be plain tap water. Now cups 2, 3, and 4 are going to have a different combination of salt water and tap water. So we're going to go from a high concentration of salt water to no salt water. So it'll kind of go in increments. Alright, so I'm going to take this egg out and then we are going to go into the next part of this experiment. Alright, so we are back and now we are going to make our different concentrations of our salt water. So I'm going to start with cup number 2 and I'm going to take 3/4 cups of our salt water and put it inside of this cup. Alright, and so as I'm pouring in my different solutions of salt water, I want you to think about which cups have more salt or a higher concentration of salt than others. And as we do the experiment, we're going to see what happens to the egg and how it floats or sinks in our different cups of water. Alright, so now that I have my cup here, it has 3/4 cup of water and 3/4 cup of salt water. I'm going to take 3/4 cup of this water and pour it into cup number 3. Now cup number 3 also already had 3/4 cup of plain tap water inside of it. Alright, so now this cup is mostly tap water and then it has a little bit of salt water inside. So as we keep adding more plain water into a solution, it's called diluting it. So each cup has less and less salt water and it's less concentrated. It's getting more dilute. Alright, so now we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to pour 3/4 cup of this solution or this mixture into cup number 4. Alright, and so now we have all of our different concentrations of our water. So in cup number 4, it is mostly plain tap water and it just has a little bit of salt water. Now for cup number 4, I'm just going to take out 3/4 cup and pour it into this bowl just so that each glass has the same amount of water. It is time for us to be able to see what is going to happen to our egg as we put it into these different cups of water. So we're going to start with cup number 1 and we're going to go up through each cup to see what happens. Make sure you have your focusing goggles on so that you can make sure that you're noticing any changes between how the egg floats or sinks in each cup. And we are just going to gently place it into cup number 1. And cup number 1 is completely salt water. Can you see what is happening? So our egg is floating, and if I press it down, it pops right up. That's how you can really tell how buoyant something is. If you press it down, how quickly does it rise back up to? Alright, so next we are going to transfer the egg from cup number 1 into cup number 2. And cup number 2 has half tap water and half salt water. So cup number 2 is also floating or causes the egg to float. But more of the egg is under the water. Okay, let's transfer our egg to cup number 3. I wonder what's going to happen. Oh, so the egg is still floating. But I've noticed that it is not floating as much. It is only a little bit of it is peeking out the top. And it takes a lot longer for it to rise back up. Okay, let's move on to cup number 4. Alright, so cup number 4, the egg has sunk to the bottom. So it is floating a little bit in underneath the water, but it is completely submerged. And we know that cup number 4 is mostly all tap water with a very little bit or a very little amount of salt water. And then let's go back to cup number 5. What happens? Alright, and as we can see, the egg is floating completely, it's sunk completely to the bottom of the cup, and it isn't even moving around as much as cup number 4. So in cup number 4, the egg kind of was moving up and down under the water. Here, the egg just went straight to the bottom. It doesn't have any buoyancy at all. It doesn't have an ability to float or move in the water. Alright, so just before we end the lesson, I just want to go over a few of the terms that we discussed today and learned. So the first term that we learned today was concentration. And we said that the concentration is how much of an object is in compared to some water. So for our cup number 1, it was very concentrated. There was a lot of salt added in comparison to the amount of water that we had. And we noticed that it was very concentrated based on the cloudy appearance of. Another term that we did learn was dilution, or something being dilute. So as we added water to each cup, it became more dilute and it didn't have as much salt in it as compared to cup number 1. So cup number 1 was very concentrated, where I'll say cup number 5, it wasn't really dilute because it didn't have any salt water in it, but cup number 4 was very dilute. Had a little bit of salt with a lot of tap water. Alright, so the next term that we learned was buoyancy, and buoyancy is the ability for something to float in water or another liquid. And we learned that we got to see how the buoyancy of the egg changed in the different waters. In cup number 1, which had a lot of salt water, it was able to move up and down really fast, and it kind of popped back up to the top of the water the moment I pressed my finger down. As we went down the cups, it became less and less buoyant. It took a little bit longer for it to pop up to the surface, or it didn't pop up to the surface at all. Cup number 4, it kind of bounced underneath the water, whereas in cup number 5, it just sank straight to the bottom and didn't really have any movement after that. Alright, and the last term that we learned was density. We know that in order for an object to be buoyant or have buoyancy, we have to understand how dense it is. Now, generally, if something sinks in water, that means that it is more dense than the water. The things or the molecules that make up that shape take up a lot more space than the molecules of the water, which kind of makes the object heavier than the water. That's a good way to think of density. Heavier objects will sink because they're more dense than the water. Now, objects that are lighter than the water or have less molecules taking up the same amount of space, they will float. Now, you might be wondering, well, if the density of the egg did not change, why did it float in the salt water and then not in the tap water? So, here's the thing. Salt water has a different density than tap water. So salt water is a lot more dense than tap water. There are more molecules of salt and water inside of our salt water that makes it a little bit heavier than our tap water. Which means when we put our egg into the different cups, even though the egg stayed the same, had the same density, how it reacted with the different waters changed. So basically the density of the egg is a lot lighter, or it's less than the salt water, which made it float. But the density of the egg is more than the tap water, which made it sink. Alright, so that was the end of our experiment for today. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it and learned something about eggs and density and floating and sinking. I feel like this experiment was relatively easy, but it had a lot to learn and discuss, which is amazing. So thank you again for tuning in, and I will be back again next week with another egg experiment. We'll be doing egg experiments for the next 3 weeks. Alright, so thank you for watching, and I will see you later.